Hello, everybody, and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic, and welcome back to the Good Morning Asgard podcast. This is episode 45, where this morning we are going to be talking about the Transformers box office, looking into the history a bit to see exactly where Rise of the Beast stands up against the other films in the franchise. We'll also be doing a further dive into films like The Little Mermaid, as the cope for this movie continues to rise. There are some in the mainstream media who are finally waking up to the fact that the film will be a massive flop and a massive disappointment, but I think there are also still others, including our boy Scotty Boy Mendelson, who have gone on the record to try and talk about and try and spin the domestic box office into something that it really honestly isn't when compared to some of the biggest opening weekends, some of the biggest box office draws in the domestic marketplace, not to mention how it compares to the other live-action Disney quote-unquote reimaginations. So we'll talk about that today as well. Before we go further, though, please make sure to smash that like button, not that fire button, Ozzy, and smash the rumble button as well. And welcome. By the way, thank you, everybody who has already bought one of the plushies over on Makeship. For those that maybe don't know, Friday Night Tights, we have plushies that are being made right now. And so right now you have mine is live. This is Crusader Odin, Templar Odin, with a Deus Vult pizza shield in pizza sauce. Very, very cute. Adorable. I think it looks very much like me. But anyway, this is currently on sale over on Makeship. And thank you all again for ordering those, because once we actually hit the goal, then they will for sure go into production. This is the first time that I've ever done anything with them before. But if you have not already gotten yours, please make sure to go ahead and do so. I'll go ahead and post the link in the chat right now. And let's go ahead and say hello to the people. I'm terrible at self-promotion. Anyway, Scott McKenzie, what is going on, good sir? It was great meeting you at the meetup in Dallas. I still have the challenge prayer coin that you gave to me. Thank you very much. And I was actually finally able to sit down and to read the quote from scripture from the letter to the Ephesians. And it's a beautiful quote. And I love especially how the coin focuses on the different ways that we are called to be defenders of the faith, to put on the armor of God and to defend, and especially in today's world with all the craziness and all the crazy things that are going on right now, especially during this month, above all the other months throughout the year. This is, I think, a very timely thing. So thank you again very much, good sir. It was great meeting you, great talking with you. Derek McManus, what's going on? Welcome back to the chat. Mr. Roy, hail to you, good sir. Hope that you continued to have and overall had a wonderful time on your vacation, on your trip in my great state. Miss Minnesota Hockey Fan, how about a hockey player? What is going on? Kat in Philly. Kat, what's going on? What is going on? Says, finally made it to a live stream. Yes, so happy to see you here. It's been a while. Glad to have you in the chat. Thank you again for being here. Derek McManus, good morning. It's 3 p.m. in Northern Ireland. Ah, yes. But here in the real world, which is America, it is definitely still morning. Again, Kat, thank you for being here. Awesome to see you chilling in person with the FNT crew. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. This trip was definitely a lot of fun. The place that we went to, Farm and Feed, was really cool. Now that I've actually been there, the whole concept of the booths makes so much more sense to me. So hopefully next year, if we use that location again, I'll probably end up trying to get my own booth, not because I expect to have any myriad of people, but mainly because there was definitely some confusion, I think, at the booth, because I was sharing a booth with Quarter Black Garrett. Shout out to Quarter Black Garrett. He's awesome. And he was very generous enough to let me know that I could tag along in his booth. But I think there was some confusion because obviously he is much more established and has things going a lot more, like, I guess he has a lot more going for himself as far as planning and as far as just general, ideas are concerned. And he had a full sheet on, hey, here's what I have, here's the cost, etc. Whereas I was just giving everything away for free because that's just the kind of, person that I am. He was just like, I don't, go ahead and take it. So I think some people were looking at the stuff and wondering I don't want to pay for that. And it's like, hey, I understand. So I might actually just get one just so that way it's clear, or at least have a sign saying, hey, take it. It's free. because I still have so many pins, so many buttons, I should say, left over. I thought that those would go a little bit, but interestingly enough, more people were interested in the little magnets, which I thought was awesome. And also, even more than that, I had more people taking rosaries than anything else, which was, again, amazing to see. I think I had gone with about 50 rosaries or so, and I had gone through basically all of them by the end of the time, both there and then the next day as well. Giving those out to the people coming to see, people in the Friday Night Tights audience, but then also people who are part of the Friday Night Tights, Friday Night Tights itself, the people who are, surrounding us. And so it was really cool. It was really, really cool to see. Great Wood, what is going on? Welcome back. Father Luca, hail y'all. Hope you're having a great Monday. Hope you're having a great Monday as well, Father. Thank you for being here. Sadakar Legion, I can't read this morning. Odin, what's going on? Welcome back. The Morak in the chat, what is going on? Thenotas Felicitas, I know where you've been this weekend. I wish I was there. I would have needed bail. Hey, well, thank you for the kind words, and yeah, hopefully you can make it out there next time. Scott McKenzie, who's a member, says, thank you very much for the rosary and good talk discussion at the meetup. Thanks for taking the time, the long drive. You're welcome in Texas anytime. Well, thank you very much, Scott. I appreciate that, man, and thank you again for the coin. And yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was definitely fun, and the drive actually was better than last year. Last year, the Airbnb that I stayed at was closer to Dallas proper, and so I think I had gotten caught in a lot of city traffic around the time that I had left. So coming in that Wednesday, last Wednesday, definitely helped. And also because the meetup was in Plano, Texas, I was able to find a hotel in Plano, Texas that was actually cheaper than many. In fact, it's actually kind of insane, kind of a weird comment and weird tangent here about Airbnb. I don't know what happened with Airbnb. Airbnb, honestly, I just... something's happened over the last year or so where it's trash. Like, I hate to say it that way, but it definitely is. It's not nearly as good as I remember it being, because when I was actually looking for places to stay, the vast majority of the locations were all just rooms, like rooms in houses without a private bathroom, all with shared bathrooms. And there's no option. And I don't think there's ever been an option to choose or at the very least, it's not an easy option to find a private bathroom. But I just remember always in previous years, whenever I would look, it would always be some of the top choices would have, right, it would be an extra room isolated from the rest of the house with a private bathroom, with a private entrance, that kind of thing. But all the ones this time, it was like, oh yeah, you get to stay in a room in this person's house. And I'm like, that's just weird. It was very bizarre to me. And it was very hard to find a place that had anything. So I ended up just giving up on it. And hey, I would say, for these kinds of trips, I usually try to do Airbnb. And I was like, maybe I'll just try the hotel route. Let's see what I can find. And then I found a hotel for like $50 a night. And I was like, oh, wow, this is actually the same price, if not even better than most of these locations that don't even have a shared, that don't even have a private bathroom, I should say. And so, it was like a 2.5-star hotel. So not, anything fancy or anything, but still, it did exactly what it needed to do, which was allow me to have a place to sleep, a place to chill. And I was able to, slowly get myself ready for the meetup, having, the evening on Wednesday just to rest and relax. On Thursday, I was actually able to go to Mass that morning. There's a beautiful chapel, beautiful church, Mater Dei Parish, the Latin Mass parish in the Dallas area. And it was awesome. It was amazing. And so I was able to do that and then just chill, made some rosaries, watched some Babylon 5, finally through all of season 1 of Babylon 5. For those wondering what the update on that is, I've just started season 2. So far, very much enjoying it. It's good. It's really, really good. Forever Sci-Fi, welcome back to the chat. Thank you for being a member here on the channel. Thank you. Akuris, what is going on? Good to see you at this hour. Thank you, man. Thank you. Yeah, it's been fun doing the Good Morning Asgard podcast. Once again, it's my summertime podcast as I work during the year. So, yes, I was very happy to see that. And it's amazing, too, because the rosaries, it's not like, that means, there was like 50 plus Catholics there. No, it's people who are just clearly drawn to, and it's just, again, it's something that I just love to see, right? Even if there's people there that don't have any faith or are struggling in their faith, and just to hear the stories that people had saying, oh, I really hoping to get one because I've been trying to get back into a life of prayer, and I've been wanting to try pretty much anything. It's like, that's awesome, right? I love to be able to support that. Keck44, what is going on? Scott McKenzie, thank you again for being a member for 12 months in a row at the Citizen of Asgardian level. Appreciate you being here. Brightburn, this is random, but I feel like a lot of people would be angry if they make either an animated remake or live action one of Back to the Future, but with animation, at least you can ignore it. Yeah, I know that that's something that's been talked about for years. The one positive, the one sign of hope that I have about Back to the Future is that at the very least, as long as Zemeckis is alive, he is going to do everything he can to make sure that does not happen. I know that he's been very clear about not wanting to bring those, not wanting to, basically beat a dead horse with that franchise. And so it seems to me like we won't have to worry about that, at least for the foreseeable future. However, as we've seen with Disney, especially, and, Warner Brothers to a certain extent too, there's this attempt, right, to try to bring back all of these old classics, all of these old properties that were great in their time and have held up over time. And I think that's like the big problem that current modern day Disney especially has, is that they miss that part, right? There's two parts that they see. Oh, this was very successful. Oh, this has stood the test of time. So in their mind, all they ever see is this film was very successful. This film made a lot of money. This film sold a lot, of DVDs and Blu-rays and VHSs, etc. But then they forget about the whole test, standing the test of time. They forget about the fact that, yes, but the reason why they did as well as they did is because they were good stories, because they were well told, because they were well animated. Instead, what are we getting? Soulless, completely soulless remakes in the vast majority of cases that will not stand a test of time whatsoever. And we'll talk again a little bit more about that, especially in regards to Disney's live-action remake of The Little Mermaid and just how bad the film is actually doing, despite what some people in the media are trying to say. But the first thing we're going to talk about today, and thank you all again for being here, I'll get back into the chat a little later, but the first thing to talk about is the Transformers franchise, because the Transformers franchise, let's just say, it's in an interesting boat right now. I talked about this on the box office breakdown yesterday about how the Transformers movie had a decent opening, right? It had a mediocre opening. It had one of these openings that overall some would be able to argue, hey, this is really, really good, okay? It came in above projections in almost every single way, and some people have said that they've liked it. I've heard more people say that it wasn't very good, that they didn't like it. And this seems like the kind of movie that's going to have that kind of response, right? It's going to be that hit and miss. I feel like that's the Transformers franchise in a nutshell, right? There's people who really enjoy the Michael Bay movies. I don't quite understand why they enjoy those movies, but there are people that do, right? And so obviously it makes sense that this film would have a very similar reaction. But the fact is that it did perform better than expected, but in context, in comparison to all of the other previous Transformers films, this had the second worst domestic opening. The second worst domestic opening, and I wouldn't be surprised if that would then also be the second worst opening ever, right? Because typically these movies are a lot stronger in the international markets anyway, and so for it to have the second worst opening domestically, it makes sense that that would also hold true internationally as well. Let's just say internationally this film has a presence, but in the grand scheme of things, especially with a close to $200 million budget, it is just not going to end well, I think, for this movie. This film would have to have a very strong hold next week in all places if it had any hope of doing so. Now, remember, we do have a major release coming out later this week, and unfortunately, I will have to go and see it, and that is The Flash, right? And even though I think personally that there's a better chance of that film flopping than succeeding, especially if we take into account that the reported budget for that movie, I don't think, is being truly honest. I think that budget might actually get updated because they're trying to say it was less than $200 million to make that movie, and I'm here saying, oh, nay. There's no way that film costs less than $200 million, especially with all the talk about reshoots and the massive delays, etc. It just does not seem realistic, especially with how much money Warner Brothers, right? Because Disney is not the only major spender. Warner Brothers is too. That's why Disney and Warner Brothers tend to be some of the worst performing studios in any given year, these past few years especially, because they've been spending the most money and making essentially the least amount of money, or at the very least not making as much as they would need to make up for their massive spending. And so because of that, I think we can still look at that movie and still recognize, even though the film, I think, has a better chance of failing than making money, is still going to be the number one film. There's no doubt in my mind that The Flash is going to be the number one movie at the box office in any market it opens in this coming week. So taking that into account, I think there's then a lot of things working against Transformers, because the people, the audience, as far as the age demographic, the male-female demographic, I think that it's going to cut into the audience that would typically be drawn to a film like Rise of the Beast. So I would not be surprised if the drop-off for Rise of the Beast is quite hefty next week, right? The word of mouth has been very middle of the road, very mediocre, and it's going to have massive competition from a film like The Flash, which is going to dive into and really, carve out a lot of that audience demographic. And I know this is something that Valiant Renegade, shout out to him, I know this is something that he talks about all the time. It's also going to be taking away basically all of the premium format theaters, right? So it might still have, if it has any 3D showings, it'll still have those, but any of the IMAX showings, those are going to be gone. Any of the AMC Prime showings, those are going to be gone, right? Any of those higher priced tickets are not going to be available to this movie. And so that's why I think you will see a pretty massive drop. But again, going into this article from Deadline, they talked about how it came in well above the projections. It even said it's 36% ahead of the previous title, Bumblebee. All right. And so I went ahead and, talked about that and broke that down yesterday. But I also, just this morning, went to my old, ticket sales chart. It's a fun chart that I've been bringing up the last few weeks, breaking down, okay, what is the average, or what is the estimated ticket sales for these opening weekends in various franchises? So let's go ahead and pull that up, all right? So first, all right, I've adjusted the budgets for inflation and also the domestic opening weekend box office numbers for inflation as well. So first, let's talk about the domestic openings. So the first Transformers film back in 2007, kind of crazy the franchise has been around for that long, back when Shia LaBeouf was a part of the franchise. $105.7 million opening weekend for that movie. That was the first in the franchise, right? So, hey, that's a pretty good number for the first film. Ended up making quite a bit of money in the long run, right? So it was a pretty big success. It was able to build on that success with the next film 2 years later, with $156 million opening weekend domestically. Dropped a little bit with Dark of the Moon at $135, dropped a little bit more at $130 for Age of Extinction. Last night, there is a caveat to this one. This film actually opened on Wednesday in 2017. So this film actually opened an extra, basically 2 days, earlier than most films. Most films these days open around maybe 6 p.m. on a Thursday. You might have some that will get the 3 or 4 p.m. showings on a Thursday. This film, though, had the entire day Thursday and also had early screenings on that Wednesday, too. So that's why this number, if you're wondering, wait, why is the number as low as it is? This is one of the reasons why. It still had a massive drop, though, right? Because even when you take into account the money that it made with the previous day's numbers, it was still in the 60s, right? So adjusted for inflation, you're looking at maybe $70, $80 million, right? Versus 2017's numbers. So that's still quite a bit of a drop, right? 130 to being in the 60s or 70s, that's huge, right? That's essentially a 50% drop in ticket sales. And so that is gigantic. You take into account Bumblebee, $26 million, and then, of course, Rise of the Beast. So if you look at these numbers, right, if you look at these metrics, according to this would be the third entire franchise history. However, take into account that caveat with The Last Night actually having more money because it had that extra day of sales, I think it's worth arguing to say that, yeah, it actually probably had the second lowest domestic box office opening. It's even more interesting when you look at ticket sales, right? So adjusting for inflation and also taking into account the average ticket price for that given year, the first Transformers film sold about 10 million tickets. That jumped up to 14 million opening weekend for Revenge of the Fallen, dropped to 12 million for Dark of the Moon, kept itself around 12 million for Age of Extinction in 2014, plummeted to around 5 million tickets for The Last Night. And so even if you were to count in, and even if you were to add in any of the Wednesday ticket sales, you would still be adding, maybe 1 million? Being generous, 2 million. So we're talking there about, an overall ticket sales of being somewhere between 5 and 7 million tickets. And then you have an even bigger drop-off in 2018 with Bumblebee, with only 2.3 million tickets. The only major difference really between these films and Bumblebee came out around Christmas time of 2018, in December of 2018, whereas the others have been mostly summer box office fare. Now, what does that mean for Rise of the Beast? Well, taking into account the average ticket these days is around $13 or so. Some have it even as high as $14. This says right here that based on the numbers that we have, the average ticket price and therefore the estimated ticket sales for the opening weekend of Rise of the Beast, around 4.6 million tickets. That's not a very good number, especially when you compare that to the 14 million and the 12 million of the previous. So notice how strong the franchise was, especially domestically, in the very beginning, right? Somewhere between 10 and 14 million tickets on their opening weekends, right? With over $100 million in ticket sales. Then you go to the last night, which sees a quite a precipitous drop. But even with that massive drop, and even only including the 3-day numbers, so not including that extra day of ticket sales, which remember could be upwards of 1 to 2 million extra tickets, it still comes in underneath that. So even though it made $60.5 million over the 3-day versus the 55.8 over the 3-day of 2017's The Last Night, it still had less tickets because why? Tickets are much more expensive today. This is one of the reasons why, for one, inflation is so important to factor in, but also why ticket sales or estimated ticket sales are also quite important to look at too, right? So I think that is definitely something important for us to look at in this case. Now, for frame of reference, the adjusted number for Bumblebee was around $567 million. What does that mean for Rise of the Beast? Based on the numbers that we are actually seeing in front of us, actually went ahead and broke down the percentages, right, of the opening weekend numbers versus the entire domestic totals for the entire franchise. So looking here at basically the opening weekend for the first Transformers film was 17% of its entire run. Second film, 34% of its run, 41%, so on and so forth. And so taking those numbers into account then, it means, let's say best case scenario, right? The best number, the best drop that the Transformers franchise ever had as far as opening weekend versus its entire domestic run was the first Transformers film, right? So 17% of its entire domestic was made in the first opening weekend. So it had pretty strong holds the week after that. You then see a lot more massive drop-offs in the subsequent movies. Actually, no, scratch that, reverse it. Bumblebee, sorry, I just forgot how I did this earlier. Bumblebee had the 17% hold. So Bumblebee actually did perform quite well, right? It was actually the best performing opening weekend versus the ending of the franchise, right? The entirety of the franchise. Whereas the first film actually had 22%. So still very strong in comparison, had the second, best performance there. But let's assume that this movie, right, Rise of the Beast, let's assume that 60 million is 17%. All right, that was the best case scenario. That's what Bumblebee did. Let's say it has the same legs as Bumblebee is another way of looking at this. That would mean that the overall domestic, you're looking at 356 million. Do I think that that's going to happen with the competition especially? I don't. I really don't see how that possibly can happen. Looking at the worst case scenario, the entire domestic would be around 148 million. So this film performs like the other films, the other Transformers movies, then this film will not make a whole lot of money domestically. And internationally, we know that this franchise is also seeing quite precipitous drops too. And so because of that, I don't think this film has a very good chance to make its money back. Could it make its money back? Sure, it could, right? $200 million budget. That means you need to make around, $500 million or so to break even. Hey, if it does that best case scenario, if it makes over $300 million domestic, hey, just needs to make $200 million. So there's a 50-50 split between domestic and international. It could do it. But that's a big if, right? That's a big, possibility at that point. But hopefully this helps clear things up a little bit as far as why I've been saying that this opening has been very mediocre, has really not been that strong. Some people have gotten triggered by that fact. It's like, look, these are just the numbers as they stand, right? The only other film besides Bumblebee, which is the only film, by the way, that did not have Transformers explicitly in the title. And again, there's a love or hate relationship that people have with that movie. But even in comparison to that, it is the second worst opening weekend. Just based on ticket sales alone, right? Just based on ticket sale estimates alone. And this film is a far cry from the heyday of the Transformers franchise. So that's why, hey, yeah, it's better than expectations. Still came in underneath Last Night from 2017. And still, came in, yeah, good job. You beat Bumblebee. But Bumblebee had a very, very low opening weekend because Yeah, people were burned out on this franchise. People got burned by this franchise, right? Expecting to see and expecting to be given fan service and then not really getting much of anything. Not to mention not getting any good story or good acting or anything to that effect, right? And so I think that if you look to these numbers, you start to, again, use the contextual analysis that we have available to us to realize, yeah, Rise of the Beast, it's doing okay. But with The Flash coming out this weekend especially, I think it's donezo. I don't think it has any chance left. But what say you? Let's go back into the chat. Miss Minnesota Hockey fan, how about a hockey player? Classics are classic for a reason and don't need to be remade. Absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. It's amazing to me that they have not figured this out, right? That these studios care so much about making a quick buck that, one, they don't recognize that they're losing money to a massive degree, but then also, two, that they fail to recognize that because they're trying to make the quick buck, they're not putting the effort in to try to actually give a good product. They're not trying their best to give audiences something that they can actually sink their teeth into. It's really insane. Felicitas says, Ripa's website is having problems. Demand must be high. Hey, yeah. It's funny because he was talking, I believe he mentioned this on Friday Night Tights. I can't remember if it was that or if it was another conversation we were having off screen, but I think it had come up about how they had tested the website with some merchandise sales to try to make sure that things were good. They had done all the necessary stuff to make sure that, they were able to handle any traffic that would come their way. But I think the comment was made, well, you know what, the website doesn't work, or if the website fails, that actually might be a good thing because that means that a lot more than what we were expecting are coming in. So, hey, shout out to Ripa, shout out to Ripaverse. I know that the pre-orders for ISOM 2, I believe they launched this morning. And so that's, again, it's a good problem to have, I would say, right? It's one of those mixed things. It's bad because it means people can't access the content. It can't, put their pre-order in. But it also means that the traffic is much higher than what they were anticipating, which means that you could see ISOM 2 be just as much of a success, if not even more of a success, especially since now more people have access, more people have eyes, more people know about this one. So the first one made, $3 million? You could see that one go up quite a bit. It'd be interesting to see what those numbers end up being. Chef Nick Nero, what is going on? Thanks for being here. All right, let's see. JHand04, tried to say, that's the sad thing about Bumblebee. We said earlier, by the time some of the fan service started in the said film, it was basically too late. Another note, I found the film to be solid. Yeah, and I know that there are a lot of people that are fans of Bumblebee. I think Jeremy is also someone who when the film came out, was very surprised by it and thoroughly enjoyed it. I didn't. I am someone where typically you need to have a good story in order to be able to entice me, in order to get me, to have your back, basically. And the film story sucked. And I always hate the go-to, right? There's always that go-to expression that people use saying, if you're going to a Transformers movie expecting a good story, that's on you. It's like, no, I'm sorry. There are plenty of films that have tons of explosions and tons of action that can still have good stories. I look at the John Wick franchise as a great example of that. Those are films that have crazy action, right? Insane action, but also have really good stories going on in the background. And I know that everyone's a big fan of the stories, and not everyone's a fan of the way the story is being told, but universally, people who see it say, no, it's actually a really good story. Universally, you're not going to hear that when it comes to the Transformers movies. Most people who even enjoyed films like Bumblebee said, oh yeah, the story wasn't that great. The thing that always gets me about Bumblebee, the thing that always makes me cringe, is just thinking back to the moment where the main girl in the film, it was established earlier on that she had been a diver, right? That she had been a professional diver, that she had been, not necessarily Olympic level, but that she had been diving, right? Got into trouble, etc. And at the end of the film, what does she do? She does a dive. That was a moment to me where I facepalmed. I remember in the theater being like, you got to be kidding me. Did they really just do that? Did they really just make this callback and put this focus, and the way that they shot it too? You're like, wait a minute. Why is there so much being put on this? It's I couldn't stand it. It was disgusting. But again, if you enjoyed it, I can't take away your enjoyment from it. I just don't understand it. I think the only argument that I've heard that made any sense to me was anyone who said they liked it because of the design of Bumblebee. They liked it because of the way the character was designed, and that it was very true to the comics. It was a lot more true than, it was a lot more true to the anime. It was a lot more true to the original series, and they enjoyed it for that very reason. Whereas the other ones weren't nearly as good in that regard, and I can understand that and respect that. But to me, that doesn't make up for bad storytelling. The K-Man, what is going on, good sir? Thanks for being here. The K-Man. We got Geek True 64. Hail to you. Thank you very much for being here as well. So yeah, those are the numbers when it comes to the Transformers franchise. Let's go ahead now and dive into, waiting for the chat to come up. Also, I did have this chart too, last note about Transformers. So if you just go ahead and compare this to the last night, notice again, as I mentioned earlier, the extra day that last night had, because it opened up on the Wednesday of the year it came out. It actually ended up being around $79 million by the end of its first Sunday, whereas Rise of the Beast at 60.5. So this is the reason why, at this point, Rise of the Beast is the second worst performing, right? So even if you take into account that extra day, so there's an advantage there, and I totally admit that. You all know that I've talked about that before, saying it's hard and it's really not fair to compare a 4-day versus a 3-day box office, because that extra day can make a big difference. However, you do also have to see here the fact that the only day that Rise of the Beast beats the last night, and this is using the adjustment for inflation figures that are used by the numbers, which is not the most up-to-date inflation rate, by the way. But notice the only day that Rise of the Beast beats out last night is that first Friday, which includes its Thursday opening. So you take that factor into account and you see, okay, wait a minute. Yeah, I can see why the drop-off between Rise of the Beast Friday to Sunday versus that of the last night. Last night was performing a little bit better there. So again, it definitely beats Bumblebee, and it beats it very, very easily. And I think, again, a lot of the reason why Bumblebee did so poorly early on is because of the fact that the franchise had just been driven into the ground by Michael Bay, and people were tired of it, and people weren't expecting really anything coming from it, which is why Bumblebee actually had some of the best legs of the entire franchise, right? So the opening weekend was only about 17% of the entirety of the domestic run, whereas most of the others were in the 30s or 40s range, right? So that meant that they had a much larger drop-offs every single week versus Bumblebee, which actually had some pretty strong holds, right? Performed well in that regard. But I think the big question is going to be, is Rise of the Beast going to have the same thing? I'm not hearing enough people saying Rise of the Beast is that much better than what Bumblebee was as a movie. So something tells me that we're going to see drops probably closer to that of the original films, especially since this is Transformers, whereas Bumblebee, again, the only Transformers film to not have that in the title. I know that's a very small thing, but in my head, it's like, okay, clearly the people who made this film were thinking within the same mindset, so it would make sense if it would perform in a very similar way as some of those other ones did too. But yeah, we will see. We will definitely see as it goes on. A small update here: Spider-Man across the Spider-Verse. Oh my goodness, I am just all over the place this morning. Didn't get a lot of sleep over the last few days because of the driving in. 10 to 11 hour driving is my limit. It does something to me. But this movie is doing very well. I know that someone in the comment section had mentioned that the international box office between Spider-Verse and Little Mermaid isn't a huge difference. But you have to remember perspective in this. And you have to remember as well that when you look at the percentage difference, over time, that does add up to be quite a bit, right? Whereas Spider-Verse has a chance of being able to easily pass $600 million. Little Mermaid doesn't really have any chance of maybe passing 500 million, but it's going to struggle to do that. And so let's dive into those numbers real quick. All right. So right now, if you look at the overall box office for Little Mermaid, $414 million. Now, there's a lot of coping going around this movie right now because of this number right here, right? You have people even like Scotty Boy Mendelsohn, who used to work at Forbes, and now he's off in obscurity, but he's still available on social media. Just remember that he became especially well known. I've known about him for a long time because he's always covered the box office, but he became especially well known by people outside of box office circles because he defended cuties. And need I say more? But regardless of that, his main thing, and a lot of people covering the box office in their defense of this movie, have always been trying to bring up that domestic number, right? saying, well, look at the domestic. The domestic, it's doing really well. Look at the holds, right? It's holding in the 40s and 50s, and that's incredible. Percentage-wise, that might be true. Percentage-wise, those are very good holds. They're not spectacular, though, right? If you want spectacular, look at the holds that the Mario movie made. Look especially to the holds that Top Gun Maverick made when they were in the teens and 20s and 30s. We're not seeing that from Little Mermaid. Mermaid's not nearly performing that well, right? So again, it's a good holds that we're seeing, from week to week, but they're not fantastic. Add to that the fact that you cannot ignore the international box office, right? That's kind of the caveat that they try to add in, saying, well, putting the international aside, putting the racist aside, well, let's just look at the domestics. Okay, let us actually do that. Let us actually look at the domestics, and I can show you why, even just looking at these numbers, it's leaving a lot to be desired. A ton to be desired. Firstly, the one movie that I've been comparing this film more so to anything else is Aladdin from 2019, right? The last major release. It's amazing how many people are like, I don't see why Aladdin's performance is relevant to The Little Mermaid, because they're all part of the live action reimaginings that Disney has been doing, and this was the last one to get a full theatrical release. I can't compare it to Mulan, because that film didn't get a full theatrical release because of, COVID and the coof and everything like that. So, if I were to use that as an example, you'd be like, well, that's not fair because of coof. This is the most fair comparison that I could possibly give. They are literally both classic animations that are part of a beloved franchise of films in the animated musicals, right, from the 80s and 90s. People love these movies to a massive degree, and these are the live-action remakes of those films, and they're only 4 years apart. Gee, I wonder why this is a good comparison. Gee, I wonder why I would be using this film as a comparison. So firstly, remember, Little Mermaid, whoa, my goodness. I can't believe they actually spent $250 million on that garbage. That's insane. So you look at that, right, and you see, okay, $200 million versus $250, all right, so not too far off there, but still quite a bit. Opening weekend, remember everyone and their mother was talking about how, well, Little Mermaid had a higher opening weekend. Yeah, with the unadjusted figures, not to mention the average ticket price. We know for a fact that Aladdin sold more tickets than The Little Mermaid did. And then we get to this, all right? And this is kind of like the main point of it, is they're trying to argue, right? Okay, this film is doing really well. The holds are really, really strong. The issue is that it is tracking well below what Aladdin did, all right? Aladdin ended around $405 million, $788 million internationally. We already know there's no way Little Mermaid is ever going to get close to that international number. That this film is a massive flop internationally. By the way, the only major market it was waiting on was Japan. And the last I heard, it had opened to around $5 million in Japan. And some are analyzing that to mean that it will probably end up making $30 million in Japan. That would be a far cry from the $100+ million that was made by Aladdin. But hey, I guess that's a part of the Asian markets, and we all know mainstream American media thinks those Asian markets are just a bunch of hateful bigots who never go see movies that have people of color in their lead. Wait, no. That's not true because, the Miles Morales movie is actually doing pretty well in many of those same markets in like-for-like comparisons. I guess that doesn't work either, right? So anyway, internationally, we already know that it's donezo. But let's go ahead and say, all right, let's hear you out about this domestic. You're saying it's really impressive. You're saying it's really, really good. Okay, well, still, $405 million adjusted for Aladdin. Now, this is not using the most current rate of inflation, but still $400+ million is what that first Aladdin film saw. Now, other than the opening day between Little Mermaid and Aladdin has beat this movie, Little Mermaid, every single time. 34 versus 30, 34 versus 27, 28 versus 23, every single day. There's not a single day other than the opening. And remember, too, Little Mermaid would be, versus 2019, see many more show times, because of the fact that you have earlier premiere titles now versus what it was in 2019. And also the difference between them isn't all that much. Remember, too, if you just adjust this a little bit higher because using the current rate of inflation you would have to, that would mean that the difference between them would be, a couple $1 million? All right, well, that couple $1 million goes away very, very quickly when you remember, okay, those extra showings that this film would have had. But even more importantly, the average ticket price. It's gone up quite a bit since 2019. So even if you take that out of the factor, even if you take inflation out of it completely, there's not a single day Little Mermaid has sold more tickets. Not a single day. That's not good. In fact, if you look at the current trend right now, 228 versus 265 at the same point of release that Aladdin was in, I went ahead and did the figures on this. That means that right now, Aladdin has about a 17% advantage. So Aladdin, at the same point of release, was 17% ahead of The Little Mermaid. If that number holds, if that number continues, right, if the separation between them remains at 17%, and that number probably won't change all that much because it's now been out for a few weeks, so the chance of a lot of volatility in the numbers from this point forward is not too high, though it obviously could happen. We see right here, even in the adjusted numbers, right, there's not too much difference in them, and so 17% difference will probably end out, right? So let's assume then, right, if the 17% difference in performance versus Aladdin and Little Mermaid holds, since Aladdin was around $405 million, what would that mean for Little Mermaid, right? If there's that 17% difference, I can tell you what it would mean. That means that the likely final domestic number for The Little Mermaid is $336 million. Domestic. $336 million domestic. So, 336 versus $400 million, okay, that's quite a bit of difference, right? It's about a 17% difference actually between them. What's even more interesting is that, oh, well, it's still doing really well. It's going to be one of the highest domestics of the year. Well, I think that you're kind of forgetting the fact that just because you have the highest domestic or one of the highest or a top 10 domestic of the year does not mean that you've actually made money. Remember, you still have to pay back not only your budget, but then also you have to pay back the marketing cost, which for this movie, reports are that it costs around $150 million worth of marketing, in addition to the $250 they spent on production, by the way. So a minimum of $125, a max of $150, that's a lot of money you got to pay back. Not to mention, this is also something that for some reason people just don't understand, you don't get 100% of your box office receipts if you're a studio. Some say it's a 50-50 split. I've always gone by the metric that it's a 60-40 split. Studios get about 60%, theaters get about 40%. It's always made sense to me. Remember that I used to work at a theater and I was able to talk firsthand with a GM, someone running the theater, and I would always ask, what is it? What is the actual takeaway that we get on these ticket sales? How much do we actually get from it? And for opening weekends, for the first 2 weeks of opening, it was always told to me, we get about $1 for every 10. So out of the ticket sales, 90% of that goes to the studio. When all is said and done, 10% of it is kept by the actual theater. And that makes a lot of sense as to why the cost of popcorn and drinks is so high, because that's where they make their money. And then if you have a really successful film, a la something like a Top Gun Maverick, that film's still making millions upon millions of dollars, 3-4 weeks out, you get a much bigger return on that if you are a theater at that point in time, right? Because the vast majority of the money made. Either way, right? Whether you are a 50-50 split between studios and theaters, whatever it might be, it's still, you need to make a lot of money, right? That's the reason why Little Mermaid needs to make at least $625 million. Some might have it closer to $800 million just for it to actually break even, to pay back its budget, to pay back the marketing cost, and to account for the fact it doesn't get 100% of those ticket sales. So let's go ahead then and, further expound upon this, right? So that 17% difference between Aladdin and Little Mermaid means, again, that $336 million is a very likely scenario of where Little Mermaid ends up domestically. All right, well, what is that $336 million in comparison to other Disney live actions? Okay, well, here are the totals, unadjusted, by the way, for all of the Disney live actions. And also, I love this, Disney live action reimaginings. I love that. I love the way that's explained. So Lion King is at the top. Really no surprise there, right? This is all the reimaginings, so this is not the originals, which are infinitely better. But Lion King 2019, $500 million. Beauty and the Beast, $500 million. Jungle Book, $360 million. Aladdin, $355. Alice in Wonderland, $334. So even just accounting for the fact that inflation clearly has happened over these years, we recognize then that Little Mermaid will be what? Number 6 on that list. It'll be the 6th highest domestic. So it's not even a top 5 domestic for the entirety of their reimaginings. And remember, I have not adjusted any of the other films below that. I think that Maleficent, when adjusted, I did that a very quick breakdown. I think it comes to be around $320 million. So if the gap between Aladdin and Little Mermaid gets even wider, and the film comes in underneath that $336 million number, that would mean that you could see this being a number 7 on their domestic list. So why people are defending this, or why people are saying this is a huge and impressive domestic, it's not even impressive when compared to their other reimaginings. It's number 6 or 7 in that. And that's nothing when you compare that to the entirety, the top grosses of the domestic market. You would have this movie at 336. Again, here's another chart from Box Office Mojo, also unadjusted. So let's say it does hit that $336 million number. Okay, now you're looking at the 70th. Yes, that's right, 70th best performing domestic. And some will try to argue, well, look, it's right up there with Joker, and it's right up there with Aquaman, etc. But remember, people are acting as if this is one of the best domestic performances of all time. And the reason why is because it's a coping mechanism. It's because things are so bad internationally, right? Just to remind you, again, between Aladdin and Little Mermaid, Aladdin made $788 million internationally. Right now, Little Mermaid's only at 185. It would be lucky to hit, 250, maybe, internationally, especially since Japan, based on the numbers that we have reported right now, is not going to be showing up for this movie. So all they have is the domestic. But when you take the domestic, right, the sole thing they have to look to, the sole thing to have to try to throw a bone to this movie, when you actually put it into the context of the entirety of their live-action reimaginings, or let alone the entirety of domestic box office history, even unadjusted, you're talking about a film in the 70s. When you start to adjust these numbers, because you have 2007's Transformers, 2008's Iron Man, okay, those numbers go up quite a bit. So now we're talking about this film being in the hundreds of domestic box office? Yeah. So continue to try to push the narrative that this film is doing next to anything domestically, that it's somehow a huge success domestically, when, okay, yeah, percentage-wise, it's doing okay. When it's dropping in the 50s from week 1 to week 2, those are strong holds. But a strong hold on a subpar opening weekend, or at the very least, a fair opening weekend, in addition to the fact that this movie cost as much as it did and is doing nothing internationally, how could you possibly come to the conclusion that this film has any positive sign, any positive data point? The only way you could do that is if you are coping. And the media clearly is. What say you? All right, let's head back into the chat. The Morak tag to say, do you have enough box office data to determine what percentage of the total daily or weekend box office of a certain movie got? I don't do daily tracking. Yeah, I don't do daily tracking. I do have data, though, for opening weekend. So I have opening weekend and then the second weekend. So that accounts for that drop-off, too. And that goes back to 2019. So pretty much every major release back to 2019, I have that data in my own chart. So that's why I did end up trying to figure out, okay, for global worldwide releases, is there a correlation between opening weekend globally and the final result? And it was interesting because many films make about a third of their entire box office in their opening weekend. Not everyone. Some perform much better. Some perform a lot worse. But roughly a third is made in their opening weekend. I found that interesting, right? On average, that a movie would make about a third of its opening weekend. And so that's why when the opening weekend numbers came out for a film like Spider-Verse, I was able to look at that and say, okay, this film has a chance of being able to get to $600 million. Because of the historical average that most films have in their opening weekend. So just as a frame of reference, right, to mention the films today that we've been talking about. Let me go ahead and get my handy dandy calculator out because I love doing this stuff live, as you all know. So Transformers made $170 million globally in its opening weekend. So if that is a third of its entire total, you're looking at the film capping out around $500 million worldwide. And so guess what? That would put it at its break even. But remember, my break even, some would consider to be conservative. So if others break even is 3 times the budget, then okay, you have a film not breaking even. So the movie's either going to lose a little bit of money or barely make money. And if you have a movie You don't want to have, okay, you don't want, it's basically think of it this way. If you're putting $200 million into a movie and you get a few $1,000,000 in return, that's not good. That's not good. You don't put $200 million into a film to make just a few million back in net profit, right? You try to make a lot more than that. So that's why, I go back to that. If this film performs historically as many other films have, the chances of this film being a success are just really non-existent. It actually even has a good chance with The Flash coming out, especially if we see a massive drop-off in that week 2 number, it's going to be even worse. But we'll have to wait and see. It's still too early to tell. But let's see. Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, that opened at $208 million worldwide. And so therefore, you're looking at, $600+ million overall? If, again, that 30% number holds. And again, that's the average. And so the chances of that happening are pretty good. The Little Mermaid, if we go ahead and look at that film, we had done this previously, but that film opened at $163 million worldwide. Times 3, that's 489. So you look at that number, the data that I was able to find about the difference between it and Aladdin, and you can see why $500 million is being said as kind of a high hope for the movie. Not a guarantee, but a high hope that the film should have. And so, yeah, that's why even in my tracking for the film, it was at least 466, a max of 650. That was if it had massive holds everywhere. We're not seeing that. Domestically, it's holding strong. Internationally, not so much. So the chances of this film actually going closer to the minor side of things, I'll pull up the chart for y'all. So that $466 million minimum projection. Yeah, so even the average, right? So this is the average of what most films will likely do, is way too high based on the numbers that we're getting right now. So yeah, it's not looking good. Hannibal Grimm and Tanya say, I was done with Rise of the Beast 15 minutes into the film. At least I could make out the Transformers and what was going on during the fight scenes, but the script was butt. And I'm not surprised. That's kind of been the history of the franchise. They put all their money into visual effects, and they put nothing. It's not even that they put little into their story. They've put nothing into their stuff. Your average Patriot Nerd, thanks for being a member for 8 months. Appreciate that. Hannibal Grimm, Fossy. What's going on? Amazing Baking Soda, what's up? By the way, I hate the fact that the Little Mermaid's shorthand, TLM, are the same letters for the Latin Mass, TLM. Because every time I see it, my brain immediately wants to think about the Latin Mass. And then I'm like, oh, wait, no, never mind. It's Little Mermaid. So anyway, he says here, Little Mermaid is the best movie ever because it's a rich and multifaceted exploration of the dominant narratives of patriarchy, colonialism, and gendered stereotypes that have historically oppressed mermaids. Yes. Everyone wants to hear a story about mermaid oppression, don't they? Shorty Short Laura, the Mother Major General story. What's going on, Laura? I know it's very early where you are. Driving to work. Well, thank you for being here. Miss Minnesota Hockey Fan, how about a hockey player? $250 for Mermaid. And the visuals still look terrible. Yeah, $250 million for Mermaid. And the visuals are still not great. Now, I have gone on the record to say I don't think the visuals were as terrible as they could have been. I've seen worse visuals in a movie, let alone a Disney movie. But it's definitely not good, right? The photorealistic expressions of the characters, by the way, I don't know. Whoever creatively has decided that is going to be the standard by which these live action remakes go should be fired if they haven't been fired already. Because all that does is create a soulless character. Flounder doesn't look like Flounder whatsoever. And it's sad in that case, especially because unlike the seagull, right? Unlike Aquafina's seagull, cringeworthy, I feel so bad for the little kid that did the voice for Flounder because the kid is actually a very talented actor. He actually was in, let me see if I can pull this up because I don't think people maybe recognized him or maybe didn't want to give the casting really any acknowledgement whatsoever. And hey, I can totally understand why that would be the case. But the kid actually is incredibly talented. Let me see if I can pull that up real quick. Because if you actually step away for a moment and you just focus on the voices of some of the characters, you're like, wait a minute. This kid's actually giving a performance here. It's sad that the animation they decided to use, the photorealistic animation, takes any expression, any type of expression that could be given by a character out of it. That's why it is soulless. We say it's soulless because there is no emotion that could possibly be shown. Jacob Tremblay, that was the name I was looking for. So Jacob Tremblay, this is a kid who has been in films like Wonder. He was phenomenal in that movie. If you've not seen Wonder, came out in 2017, and it was phenomenal. So some of y'all might recognize him. He unfortunately was in a movie called Good Boys, which just looked awful, looked terrible. But he also apparently was one of the voices in Luca, and I've heard good things about that Disney animated film. But Wonder, I can say for sure, he was in it, and he was phenomenal. He was great. But this kid actually gave a good performance in the movie. It's actually insane to me because I think of him still as a kid, and yet he's 16. And yet in my head, I still remember him in 2017, right, when he was still actually like a little child. It's kind of amazing, actually, to me, he was able to do the voice that he did for the character of Flounder. But they took that away, right? They robbed him of being able to have a character that people could connect with because they decided to put a realistic-looking fish with no expression whatsoever. It's awful. It's terrible. Sebastian, what's going on, good sir? Who's a member on the channel, says, how much impact does the current writer's strike have on future movies? I've read that Mission Impossible 8 has shut down production, but Christopher McQuarrie is a solo writer. How does it work? It is something that I wish I had more information on. What I do know is this. The writer's strike and any writer's strike typically does a lot of damage to movies and to franchises. I think of two great examples. For a TV series, Heroes. If anyone remembers Heroes, season 1 is phenomenal. Writer's strike, season 2, oh boy, it falls off a cliff. For movies, the best example is Quantum of Solace. James Bond, Quantum of Solace with Daniel Craig. That also, impacted by the writer's strike, oh my goodness, what a garbage movie. So it does have an impact, but it's not universal. Think about any year that has been impacted in some way by a writer's strike, you still have good movies that come out. You still have good TV shows that come out. You still have good writing. I think it really just depends upon who is the person running the project. I'm not really worried about a film like Mission Impossible because when you have somebody like Tom Cruise, who is as passionate as he is about it, and he seems to be on the same page as someone like a McQuarrie, I don't think that film's going to have nearly as much of an impact. It might get delayed a little bit, but I would not be surprised if that story has already been written, if it's already there at the very least in concept, since this is part 1, right? The film coming out this year is part 1 of a 2-part story. Typically, you don't make a part 1 unless you have in your mind where you're going in part 2. So I don't think it's going to be as impacted, but let's just say there is a possibility. Geek True 64, they should just call them subpar reskins, not reimaginings. Yeah. Reimagining is too kind of a word, I think. ZK-Man, that's one thing I still run into a lot when talking box office numbers with the average person, is they don't know studios don't get 100% of the box office, confuses them when they say certain movies flop. Oh yeah, me too. It's amazing in the comment section too when people are coming in and saying, how can you say this movie's a flop? It only costs $200 million and it's already made $200 million. Because that actually shows a misunderstanding on two fronts. One, that you don't get 100% of the box office, as you said, but then also, two, they forget that you have to account for marketing. The budget itself for the movie is just the production budget. It does not account one way whatsoever for how much money they spent trying to actually push and market the movie. So there's two fronts there that there are. Luckily, most people now seem to understand it, and it's a much easier environment to go into. But I remember when I first started talking box office, the amount of comments like that, it was just, it was crazy. Animal Grimm, he was the baseball boy in Dr. Sleep and acted his butt off in that film. Again, he's fantastic. He is a solid actor. And that's why it's sad because, and that's also why I'm typically not someone who is 100% opposed to things in general. You know, for instance, I will say some kind things about The Little Mermaid. And I know that there are other people out there that are fair-minded that will do the same, right? That will give credit where credit's due. There's a lot of people, unfortunately, that won't, right? They'll just say it's all trash, it's all terrible. It's like, I'm sorry, the performance given by this kid, Jacob Tremblay, was good. The voice performance, he was doing everything he could with what he was given. I'm not going to hold that against him. I'm not going to tear him down. That's ridiculous. But anyway, Chef Nick Nero, Luca is actually a fun movie. Became one of my favorites, and I hate animation films. But it's in Italy, and being both Greek and Italian, it's cool to see that is a fun film. Yeah, and I remember when the movie came out too, and there was a lot of people saying, "Why is this film being put straight to Disney Plus? Why didn't they hold off on this movie? It's actually really good." You think about the films. It's interesting that two of the best films that Disney Animation Pixar have made over the last 5 years have been straight to Disney Plus, because I've heard great things about Luca, and then the movie Soul I've seen, and I can say it was very good. It was very good. It was very well done. And yet, I remember Soul, when that got the straight to Disney Plus treatment, I was like, why? You spent a lot of money on this movie. You're not making that back from Disney Plus. And then Luca, I heard great things about. I still need to see that one too. But yeah, it's just, yeah, it's sad to see how their good stuff gets relegated to the paywall, right, to the streaming service that so many people are leaving behind and abandoning, and it's just crazy. Miss Minnesota fan says, "Bye, my puppy wants her walk." Oh, you walk that puppy. You walk that puppy. Give that puppy a pat on the head for me, please. And Sebastian, as we wrap things up today, we do about an hour for those that have not been a part of the Good Morning Asgard podcast this summer or in previous summers. Try and do about an hour show during the week, especially since the vast majority of people voted on this time from 10 to 11 a.m. Eastern time, and the Geeks and Gamers daily stream starts at 11. So I think it's a good crossover. You get, started off, get your day started, get your coffee started with me, and then you can carry it on over to Geeks and Gamers for the Geeks and Gamers daily stream. They do really good work over there. But Sebastian says, how much does Fast 10 have to make to be profitable? So for Fast 10, yeah, remember that film cost $340 million to produce. Right, that was just the production budget on the movie. That film needs to make roughly $850 million. Now, that's a conservative estimate. There are some that have that multiplier at 3 and not 2.5. If the film is 3 times the budget, that would mean that the film needs to make roughly $1 billion and $1,020 million to break even. That movie ain't doing that. Right? That movie right now is in the 600s. It would be lucky to get to the 700s, I would say. It's probably looking at around a $700 million stop, around that amount of money. So yeah, that film is, it's not going to get there, and it's set to be a massive flop. Set to be a massive flop. Chef De Niro says, watch it with Junior. I might have to watch it with Baby Thor, because he does but he gets on tangents. Right now, he still loves My Neighbor Totoro. He still, of course, loves Star Wars as well. But yeah, it's really funny to see all those things. So anyway, those are the last of the comments. I can't speak this morning. It's crazy. But thank you all for being here. Seriously, before heading over to Geeks and Gamers Daily, check them out. Be sure to do that. Please, if you could, smash the like button. If you're still watching this on Rumble and haven't spoken, or watching on Odyssey and haven't spoken, light up the fire button, smash the Rumble button as well. And also, if you are still in the chat, please, if you can, check out the plushie. I have a plushie, Friday Night Tights themed plushie. You have Crusader Templar Knight Odin with the Deus Vult Pizza Shield. I think last time I checked, I'm at 70% funded. So if it gets to 100%, then they will officially go into production, and you are guaranteed to get one of these. If it doesn't reach that, then it won't go into production. But yeah, I think it's really cool. If you like plushies, I think it's a great plushie. It has a actually removable pizza shield right here. So you don't have to have the shield there if you don't want to, but it is removable in that way. And yeah, so check that out, and check out the link that I just posted in the chat below. And anyway, yeah, just once again, thank you all for being here. It really does mean a lot. These streams are a lot of fun for me. And thank you all if you were able to join us in Dallas for the Friday Night Tights meetup. It was great. It was fun. As far as other meetups for the year, I know I will not be able to make it to Anime Matsuri because school starts August, so that's a no-go. There is I think there's it's like a UFO or something like that event going on in North Carolina. I think it's Asheville, North Carolina this weekend. That is a maybe for me. So we'll see how things go schedule-wise. Obviously, having Baby Thor. And also, my wife, who's far along at this point, well over 25 plus weeks along with baby girl. It becomes a little bit more complicated to plan out those trips. But I know that one is not as far away, so I could probably, if something happens with that, I don't know if there's going to be a meetup per se. I know that Gary is planning to go to the actual sci-fi event, so I might go and join him. Depends on, again, what gets planned, if anything gets planned. But hey, it's us, so probably won't have anything officially planned with that. But I might be in North Carolina for the Asheville event, and hopefully more information gets released soon. And I'll try and keep y'all posted on that if it does actually happen. But luckily, because it's not too far away, that's something where I could actually probably do it in a day, right? To leave early and then still come back and still be able to, get back and only be gone for a day versus being gone for an entire weekend. So anyway, let's see. Cthulhu saw a review of Buckaroo Banzai in passing and compared to movies today. I can't believe how little risk movies take. Thanks for the show as always. No problem. Yeah, it's amazing how little risk these movies are taking today. The K-Man, what's going on? Hannibal Grimm, Cat and Philly, God bless you too. Hannibal Grimm, that shield is incomplete. No pineapple. Gary sends his regards. How dare you, Hannibal Grimm? How dare you? It is complete because there's no reason to have that garbage on my pizza. So anyway, you guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Again, check out that link in the chat if you want to support the plushie and everything with that. I love you, Hannibal Grimm. Anyway, you guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless. And now for a huge special shout out to all of my June Patreon Subscribe Star and Locals members at the Keeper of the Bifrost level and above. Starting off first with Patreon, Father Luca Illich, Heimir Irie Hymason, Garrett Searles, Joe Horn, Jonathan Carney, Orange Hat Reviews, you can check it over at his YouTube channel, Orange Hat Reviews, Laura, the Modern Major General Story, Rosetta Allen, who you can check out at her YouTube channel of Eagle Rider, and Miss Martin Muses, who you can check out at her YouTube channel by the same name as well. Also to my Subscribe Star peeps, Matt317, check out his Twitch channel by the same name, Fast Reaction, The R, Mr. Roy, J-Rod the Beer Guru, and ZK-Man, who you can check out over at xtheboundaries.co. And lastly, to my Locals members, Miss Minnesota Hockey Fan, How About a Hockey Player, J.H. Schwalbach, and Robert Barnes, the amazing lawyer. And again, thank you all very much for being my supporters. If you want your name shout out at the end of every Vive stream and every video, check out the top link in the video description below. You also can get access to things like a giveaways channel where I give away Blu-rays, 4K steelbooks, all kinds of stuff every single, most weeks in the month. I try to give away something, or at the very least towards the end of the month, I will make it up with several giveaways. Basically, most people are guaranteed to walk away with something at the end of every single month. So if you want access to that, again, check out the top link in the video description below, as well as access to an exclusive podcast. This past month, I was actually able to record a great podcast with Michelle from Force of Light Entertainment. So you want access to that and also a plethora of other content, check out the link in the video description below. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless.